slightly late, but I hope we'll catch up with time. If we could have also volume from the sound guys, we don't seem to have much volume. Oh. All right, we can bring the music down. My name is Daniel Makokera. I'll be your moderator for this session. Maybe for those who have not been here before, just a background of what this is all about. It's the interactive session to bring together members of Pida's journalists who cover issues of Pida, and it's a network of infrastructure policymakers also who are here, and development partners and private sector in platform. I'm competing with some music. If we could if we could pull the music down, please. If you could pull the music down, please. Is that like centralized, or is it coming from here? I'm not quite sure. Yeah, let's just cut the sound, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So the idea really is not to formalize this, but to interact. We know that the journalists are the ones, there's a tendency, and I tend to tell certain organizations that there's a tendency of us speaking to ourselves. We know our story very well. We will speak to ourselves and we think we are experts on our stories, but we do not get the story out. So we do need those foot soldiers who are the journalists who go and tell our story. If you sit in these meetings, you get to hear a lot of people talking a lot of sensible things, and a lot of work that's happening at NEPA, there are a lot of work that's happening at the African Union and their partners, but you never get to see it in the mainstream media. And I sure hope that being someone who is very much, who has an interest in it, I sure hope that we get to get the fourth estate to tell the story beyond the buildings. So the format of the session is 1.5 hours. We will have panelists whom I will be calling on very soon. And we want to talk about what is happening. But house rules, this is being streamed. So what I always say, when something is being streamed, I know we are eating, but if you feel like scratching the wrong places, use your elbow. In other words, don't do it. Right? So it's being streamed, and you will have all the hashtags on the screen here. Those who feel like tweeting, please, there are no Chatham House rules here. You are welcome to stream this. So without further ado, may I call the panelists. And the format we're going to do is we'll have 3 minutes of the panelists introducing themselves, nothing more than 3 minutes. If you do go more than 3 minutes, we'll send you to the University of Zimbabwe and you can write a thesis about what you want to say. Right. So, not sure. Protocol has not told me how this is done, but maybe let's start. Let me start with the Commissioner of Infrastructure from the African Union to come and
say hello to you first.
Ma'am, how are you?
How are you? Happy to see you.
Thank you. Good seeing you too. Yes, and Dr. Mayaki, if you could come up, please, sir. Could we have the... I'm fine, sir, I'm fine. I think it's okay. The CEO can sit next to the... And then could we have the Director of Regional Integration at the African Development Bank, Madam Mpotola. Could we have the DBSA? And could we have Mr. Danso? Is there anything we can do with this music, gentlemen and ladies? Yes. Is Mr. Oh yes, Mr. Danso is coming. Could we have GIZ, Dr. Bomagati? And then it's higher. Oh, thank you, thank you. I think the Honorable Odinga is not here, from what I can see. So, And then we will have the, I'm told the PS for infrastructure for the Republic of Zimbabwe had been put on the list, but his request is that he just do the opening remarks, and then just to welcome you to Victoria Falls. Before it was discovered by those who sojourned here, it was called Mosuatunya, but then after they discovered it, they named it after a certain lady back at the island. So, but otherwise, the name for Victoria Falls, the indigenous name is Mosuatunya. Translated in Shona, it means the thunder that roars. Yes, the thunder that roars. And you'll see it if you visit that it is indeed the thunder that roars. So may I ask the peers of, I'm assuming these are all the speakers, right? Right. May I ask the peers to come and welcome our guests to Victoria Falls, and then we get started with the panelists. Mr. Marawase. A round of applause in anticipation. Please go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Are we hungry? Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Engineer Amos Marawa. In fact, I'm here among his colleagues. In my previous life, I've actually interacted with most of the colleagues here. In fact, I'm part of the Pida family. I've just been recently appointed in this new dispensation in our Second Republic as the CS responsible for transport and infrastructure development. My task here today is very simple, simply to welcome you all to Victoria Falls. As the moderator said, I heard some people say it is the water that thunders. I think the actual meaning is the smoke that thunders, not the water that thunders. But to begin with, Your Excellency, the African Union Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, Dr. Amani Abzaid, Chief Executive Officer of NEPAD, the NPCA, Dr. Ibrahim Hassan Miyaki, and colleagues from the African Union. Indeed, I mentioned colleagues meaningfully since I already mentioned that we were working together as colleagues in my previous life. I want to recognize, as I mentioned earlier, the AUC, NEPAD Agency, African Development Bank, DBSA, International Cooperating Partners. I recognize here colleagues from the EC, and especially the delegation, EU delegation to the African Union that I also noticed colleagues from the DBSA, DIZ, African Investor, as the moderator was saying, the AU, High Representative for Infrastructure Development. I'm not sure I think how that is. Honorable Raila Odinga. Hello? Okay, I'm told maybe this is a better mic. Let me retake that. Allow me, on behalf of the government of the Republic of Zimbabwe, to welcome you to this important media breakfast session, which signifies, I now hear there is an echo, I don't know, is it okay? as I was saying, which is being held in this beautiful resort town of Victoria Falls. I wish to welcome in particular the media personnel from across Africa that have taken time to come to Zimbabwe and be part of this traditional Pida week, which is now in its, I think this is the 4th Pida week, following on from the 3rd Pida week that was held last year in December in Swakopmund in Namibia. I wish to encourage you to continue undertaking these initiatives that are meant to enhance awareness around the importance of implementation of the Pida program and related projects, and the benefits these would usher to our Agenda 2063 and its key tenets around infrastructure development. Thank you. Including the Continental Free Trade Area and the Action Plan for Accelerated Industrial Development for Africa, AIDA, with the ultimate goal of enhancing poverty reduction in Africa, as espoused by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. I wish to commend AUC and NEPAD Agency for continuing to put this initiative together, given that we hardly get recognition for our efforts on continental programs. I look forward to a successful breakfast media session thanks to your collective efforts as media practitioners, and as for the foreign-based media practitioners, you are most welcome in the Second Republic of Zimbabwe, which has adopted a new mantra that Zimbabwe is open for business. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pierce. You're going to have to get used to that. We continue with our breakfast interaction session. The objective really for this session is on relating to the media fraternity, how Pida remains key to unlocking Africa's infrastructure potential, showcase Pida's achievements, and to acknowledge the advocacy role of the media in promoting Pida and all its projects. That's really the objective. So I hope we stick with that. And it's focusing very much with the title of this Pida week, which is Realizing Africa's Integration Through Smart Infrastructure and Good Governance. So I think I will start with our panelists, maybe without the order of importance, since we're here, and just say from my far left, if you just give Dr. 3 minutes, your input, who you are, and give us 3 minutes. And as I say, I'll be very strict on time. I'll give you a handheld mic. I'll be strict on time.
Are you sure in the order of
sorry? No, the partners, yeah. The fourth estate does not really respect rules.
Okay. Thank you very much, Master of Ceremony, and good morning everybody here in the room. My name is Inge Baumgarten. I'm representing the German corporation, the German Agency for International Cooperation called GIZ. Permanent Secretary, thank you so much for your very warm welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here in this beautiful country of Zimbabwe. And thank you very much for COMESA as well for hosting this important event. The Pida Week 2018 under the special topic of governance in infrastructure development is a very important milestone in developing infrastructure and especially regional infrastructure on the continent. So why do I say so, representing a German agency? Germany has been actively supporting Pida since its beginning, and that's quite a number of years now, with financial and technical support, because Germany believes that Africa, similar to the Asian tigers, should leap forward like the African lions on the continent in regional integration. So being a technical cooperation partner, We as GIZ bring in expertise from the continent, we bring in experience from Europe and from Germany. We link partners, bring together partners, and it has been a pleasure over the last years to work together with the African Union Commission. Thank you very much, Commissioner, for this excellent collaboration. And obviously to work together with NEPAD as the implementing agency and important implementer and coordinator for priority projects on the continent on regional integration. Dr. Mayaki, it has been a pleasure working together with you and your teams. So talking about good partnership of GIZ and Germany with NEPAD and the African Union Commission, what have we done so far? You might ask yourself, what has been the progress? Let me just mention a few examples, Chairperson, if you permit. Moving forward, you know, Germans, we are very practical. We always want to see progress, a little progress, and move forward. So what has been our contribution over the last years, together with NEPAD and the African Union Commission? We have been developing some instruments which look into monitoring progress on Pida projects. There is a virtual management platform online, which is open to the wider public, it's open to the media, so you can go online and check what progress has been made by the Pida team in NEPAD and African Union Commission leadership. What has been done in terms of road construction, railway construction, what has been achieved in regional integration, coming or looking at energy, for example. So all these progress which has been achieved over the last years is online now. You can see it for yourself, so there is evidence. And now we are moving to the next stage, which is also looking into quality of projects that are developed. And if we talk about quality, we are taking it a step further now. We've heard from the Permanent Secretary of Zimbabwe that poverty reduction is important. So talking about regional integration, we would like to see, is there inclusive growth? Do the communities benefit from the regional projects? Do the investors get attracted to these projects? Because they are huge regional integration and development projects which need large investment. And looking at this over the last years, we've seen that the investment which is required needs more private investors as well. So we would like to attract more partners, be it partners as the European Union, be it China, be it private investors, companies, and we would like to see and to show that what Pida is developing in terms of regional infrastructure has some added value for the communities at large. And this is where we as GIZ will contribute further in the future, and I'm looking forward very much to this wonderful collaboration, both with the governments and member states of the African Union and the Commission and NEPAD itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The African Development Bank. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Mono Mupotola. I am Director, as the moderator said, for regional integration at the African Development Bank, and I'm here representing the African Development Bank. Really, let me just say that from the offset, the ADB has been a partner in putting together the Pida program, but most importantly in trying to implement the Pida program. So every year, in the past, through our concession of funding, we put aside about $1 billion every 3 years to support regional projects, mainly projects that form part of the Pida project. We're also very interested, we look at the whole issue of connectivity, and as earlier mentioned, connectivity to actually develop bigger markets. And in light of the Africa Free Trade Area that was signed early this year, I think for us it's important that we look at what type of benefits the regional member countries on the continent derive from some of these regional integration projects and programs. Most importantly, let me also say that in addition, as my colleague from GIZ said, what's also important is that most of these Pida projects at currently are concepts. So what we've done and this type of support that we've provided is really to move these concepts to bankability, and through our NEPAD IPPF program, we've managed to move most of these Pida projects by doing the feasibility studies, whether it's looking at the Lagos-Abidjan corridor, whether it's looking at some of the programs along the North-South corridor, or LAPSET, where we are providing transitional support. Let me also say that in the past 3 years, we also provided support to the NEPAD agency and to the regional economic community in a program of capacity building. Again, the focus has been how do we move these programs from concept to reality? How do we make them a priority for countries to actually start implementing? And we've also gone as far as more recently in providing the African Union with a grant of 5 million to actually start implementing the Africa Free Trade Area. So as you can see, we're really a partner. We'll continue to support, we'll continue to ensure that Pida becomes a reality. For most of us, this is crucial because if you look at Africa in general, in terms of its competitiveness in the global sphere, if you look at the labor costs of Africa, we compare just like any other country in the world. In fact, if you look at Asia, we're at par. What really sets us apart is that our productive capacity is very, very low. Our production costs are very high, and most of these high production costs are a result of a very limited infrastructure that we have on the continent. And most of our countries do not have the capacity to go it alone. So it's very, very crucial that the regional projects are actually implemented because, we have to compete. We have these young people on our continent who need jobs, and really we can't continue at the pace that we do. So I think on behalf of the bank, I would just like to close by saying that we'll continue to make Pida a priority and continue to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do, CEO and commissioners, I'm going to jump you and come this side, and I'll end with you so that we get the whole round. Mr. Danso, if you can, is that working? If it's not, I'll move this one so that we move ahead. Go right ahead. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Hubert Danso. I'm the CEO and chairman of an organization called Africa Investor, and I'm also the chairman of the African Sovereign Wealth and Pension Fund Leaders Forum and the CFA's Advisory Board for Global Asset Owners. We essentially bring together the leading and the largest institutional investors, pension funds, sovereign funds, insurance companies that are investing, representing collectively over $30 trillion of capital and assets under management. I'm very pleased to be here as a long-standing partner of NEPAD. I think as a message to the media, I think we need to really commend NEPAD and the African Union because they've really set a global trend. I think now we take for granted the numerous calls for pension funds and institutional capital to be allocated and deployed to infrastructure as an investable asset class. But I can tell you with first-hand knowledge working both at the global level and on the Pan-African level, that a majority of those initiatives followed the 5% agenda, which was initiated under the leadership of Dr. Mayaki and his team and the African Union Commission. So in terms of the 5% agenda, for those who don't really have context, this is a realization that the typical financing in the market due to some of the regulatory changes similar to Basel III and Basel IV, which has put a little bit of strain on the project finance environment. There's been a real need now to access a new class of investor, a long-term investor, principally the pension and the sovereign wealth funds, who have classically not been engaged in infrastructure investments, and that's sort of shown by the fact that less than 2% of their portfolios are actually allocated to infrastructure. So the 5% agenda is a very bold initiative, a collaboration between the African institutional investment community, the African Union Commission, as well as NEPAD, to reach an agreement around a new framework. So we have PPPs, we're now talking about an institutional investor public partnership framework, which has the capacity to mobilize up to 5% of institutional assets under management on the continent. There are many different sort of scenarios in terms of the estimates, but we're talking between 600 billion to 1 trillion, as reported last week, in terms of the actual assets under management held by African pension funds and African sovereign wealth funds. And I think an interesting co-investment development linked into that is the fact that this particular 600 billion to 1 trillion has the potential to leverage 30 to 40 trillion dollars worth of global institutional capital looking for access to higher yields and global diversification. So I think in terms of what NEPAD's been able to achieve, I think we must commend that. But I think it's gone one or two steps further than we even anticipated. We identified and highlighted a number of challenges in terms of the risk profiles associated with some of the projects, some of the structures, and very quickly NEPAD and the African Union Commission came up with some very innovative initiatives. The African Infrastructure Guarantee Mechanism is one case in point, which recognizes that there are a multitude of guarantee facilities and instruments in the market, but they were slightly inefficient because they've never really been conglomerated so that people could get proper access to de-risk potential institutional capital. So we welcome that initiative. The other key thing in terms of a Pida project, we've seen the Euro tunnels, and we've seen a lot of global cross-border projects. But I think for our African setting, we are still seeking to understand what is the optimal cross-border projects investment model. So we've heard GIZ and the ADB just talk about from concept to bankability. So we're really now looking at what is that investable model for a cross-border project where we can contain and manage the risk profiles of the projects as well as the opportunities. And we think that the African Investment Guarantee Mechanism is going to be a very useful instrument as far as that's concerned. And I did make a point, and again, media, I would really like you to be able to articulate this in your own way. And I think we really need to start talking about the leadership that we are providing, not only at the continental level, but also globally. I was also seconded to be part of the establishment of the G7 Institutional Investor Initiative that was launched in Canada earlier this year, where the leading and the largest institutional investors from across G7 countries actually formed a group to try to do something very similar to the 5% agenda. Now that is a clear example of global leadership that emanated from Africa on a sophisticated instrument in the form of long-term capital coming to infrastructure. So I think I want to end there, but I just want to implore the media. We have a very interesting and strong narrative. We need your articulation of that, and we look forward to collaborating with you in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Danso. Enough there to work with when we get into the interaction time. We'll get to go to DBSA.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mohan Vivekanandan. I'm the group executive responsible for client coverage at the Development Bank of Southern Africa. From our perspective, I think what makes us a little bit unique is we're a national development finance institution. And so in terms of the work that we do, while we partner across a number of Pan-African entities and also global development partners, one of our focuses is on working with other national development banks in ensuring that the infrastructure that we're focusing on, issues around regional integration, bringing in smart infrastructure, and ensuring good governance around those, is also tied specifically to the needs of individual countries. So the way that we think about this in order to bring about the projects, including many of the ones that are part of the Pida priority projects, is to think through that infrastructure value chain. So working with national entities around making sure that there are long-term plans in place, which, for instance, 20, 30-year master plans for energy or on water and sanitation. And that could be at the national level and even at a sub-regional level, from there, again, then working with those national entities around preparing of these projects and then getting through to financing. I think on the preparation side, examples include 8 different projects that are part of the Pida platform, 2 in the transport sector, and 6 around energy transmission networks. And all of these are projects that are cross-national in purposes. So for instance, a number of the projects that make up the Southern African Power Pool to integrate the number of countries that make up that power pool and ensure that countries that have an excess of energy are able to trade with those that have a deficit in order to bring down energy costs across the region. I think one other element and an example of this cooperation is the work that we're doing with the Mozambican DFI BNI in our work with EDM, which is the electricity utility for Mozambique, where our teams are working together to solve some of the critical transmission and distribution losses and challenges that are being faced by Mozambique. And I think it's a good example of national DFIs as well working together. So we support all of the other elements as well, working closely with the African Development Bank on a number of transnational projects, and working with the AU Commission and with NAPAD under their leadership, helping us to guide the projects. And I also do want to commend the Pida Virtual Center, where the list of, I believe, 411 projects now is visible to funders, to various service providers, and to members of civil society, so they can also monitor the progress of those projects on an annual basis. With that, I'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Round of applause. I think maybe it's time we hear from you, Dr. Abu Zaid, the Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy. And you have heard what the partners have said, and let's hear what you say, the ethics of the organization.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you. I'm not going to say MC. I mean, we're all friends, so I'm really happy to see you here. I'm extremely happy to be among you today. I mean, with you today, and especially with Dr. Mayaki, and then all the teams here present, the partners, and that's exactly what Pida is about. Pida is a bottom-up initiative coming from governments and countries through the REX, through this network of REX, through the NAPAD agency, working together with the African Union at the political level. And then we have all the partners who are the implementers and the executing agencies, or the financiers. And that, I think, this gathering illustrates exactly what Pida is about, and it talks to the point you just mentioned about the project stemming from national leads or from national institutions. To introduce myself, Commissioner for Infrastructure and Energy, which includes all the transport sectors, energy, ICT, and tourism, by the way, as well, which is an important sector one should not forget. I've been involved with Pida for a very, very long time, starting from the time when I was at the African Development Bank, drafting the very first regional integration strategy in 2005, crafting the facility for financing regional operations in 2005-04, implementing many of the Pida projects, validating the Pida program in 2013. So I have been following and working with or within the Pida and regional operations for a long time. Why regional operations? You know about our continent and about the ambition of our continent through the Agenda 2063 for a united Africa, prosperous and peaceful. And to unite the continent with 55 countries, relatively very small economies, we need the infrastructure. I think we can all recognize that infrastructure is a major enabler for development and a major accelerator for development. This comes very timely, or this meeting comes also very timely, because this year, earlier this year in 2018, in January, we launched the very first flagship project from Agenda 2063, which is the continent's strategy for development. We launched the Single African Air Transport Market, with the purpose of liberalizing the African airspace to allow for more connectivity across the continent, more and cheaper connectivity across the continent. And this initiative comes in support of another initiative which we launched in March, which is the African Free Trade Area. A huge market is about to be created with it's going to be the largest free trade area in the world. How is this going to work without infrastructure? Almost impossible. And that's why our meeting today and the Pida program is more important than ever. The continent is already leaping forward and is taking incredible strides in a very short time. And for this, infrastructure is important and is an imperative. It's true. When people say, yes, we do have a deficit of finance, 100 to 130 billion a year. I do recognize that. I can translate it in a different way if I were sitting in this seat. That means I have an opportunity of 130 billion every year in this continent. And this is how it translates this, what is called infrastructure deficit is the infrastructure opportunity on this continent. However, we do have a role in order to turn the deficit into an opportunity. And this is one of the things we're going to discuss as well. We talked about preparedness. I think you've heard it from the investors, and that's very important. The level of preparedness, the packaging of these projects to make them attractive to everybody, not just the public or the financiers or the traditional or conventional investors, IFIs or partners, but we are looking and reaching out to the private sector, African private sector and international private sector. I stress on African private sector. And that's also the reason the continent created Africa 50. And also we have the excellent initiatives here. DBSA sets a wonderful example also of a national bank that reaches out across border to regional programs. So preparedness, packaging, good governance. And it is not at all an accident that the title is Smart Infrastructure and Governance, because they are linked, organically linked. And the reason we put smart, because we, as I said, when we are repackaging our projects, we want to make everything smart. This continent is writing a wonderful story when it comes to digitalization across. So we want this, all our infrastructure, which we started already. We already have several, apart from the actual, cables, and we do have the smart corridors and the smart grids and otherwise. But we are also working on the e-governance, which is important and cuts also the corruption. Mind you, this year, 2018, is the year, anti-corruption year, the theme of the year for the African Union. So all of this is very much linked, and I look forward to exciting discussions, real discussions, not standing on protocol, but real ones, highlighting the issues, bringing forward really the needs and the requests, and how do we improve and push forward and fast track all these wonderful initiatives and programs. Want to hear from everybody, so please do not feel inhibited or don't stand on protocol. Just tell us what it is, and then we'll do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I think at times you confuse your heads, which is very good. It's good to hear a commissioner speaking the way you're speaking. So we will make sure we press you on some of the points you have said. Dr. Mayaki, sir.
Thank you. And let me recognize that the commissioner is the champion of PIDA's implementation. It has to be said. I have 5 quick points. The first one is about progress. On Friday, first day, there's a visit of Kazumbula Bridge. And people who are going to visit will see a bridge, will see a road, will see a one-stop border post. So this is the progress of Pida. Regional projects concretely seen on the ground, which allows free movements and which allows to speed up intra-regional trade. So the first point is progress. Progress is visible. So that's for the media. We need to focus on the fact that progress is visible. It's visible in Kazumbula, it's visible in Abidjan, Lagos, it's visible in the Central Corridor, it's visible in the North-South Corridor. Second point is consensus. When Pida was built bottom-up, from the regional economic communities master plans, a focus was put on priority projects which came out of a consensual perspective. So all the regional projects that are flagged in PIDA and PAP, the action plan of PIDA, priority action plan of PIDA, are the object of a consensus. It's very important. Before the existence of PIDA, there was no consensus on regional projects, and you can very well imagine, but if there is no consensus on regional projects, then it's a chaotic system that needs to be fixed every time. The third issue is capacity. The commissioner very rightly talked about project preparation capacity. You know, what we keep repeating is that our problem is not money, it's lack of bankable projects. Our problem is not money, is lack of bankable projects. If we really focus on that segment of project preparation capacity and we develop the adequate projects, then we can go to financial close. And that's why the pension funds are not investing in infrastructure, because they think it's too risky. So all the movement that we have been creating all along these last years was to change the perception of risk and then focus on the levels of returns, which are quite high compared to other regions in the world, and see how to de-risk and then go towards a guarantee facility. So the issue of capacity in terms of the tools that are being put in place to resolve an issue which is not about money but about lack of well-prepared project is fundamental, capacity. Fourth issue is the managerial issue, which is linked to governance. We know how to manage, roughly, national infrastructure projects, but we didn't know up to 6, 7 years ago, and even now we are facing difficulties. We didn't know how to manage cross-boundary projects, because it needs new management systems, it needs specific organizational behaviors from the governments, which are implicated in the cross-boundary projects. So governance-wise, there are two issues that needs to be fixed: better coordination between governments, two, harmonization of the different regulatory frameworks. And the role of regional economic committees and the role that the African Union Commission is playing splendidly is to allow these two factors to be managed appropriately. So, and lastly, it's about inclusive institutions, and it's also linked to governance. During 300 years, Africa had infrastructure which was linked to extractive issues. All our infrastructure was linked, which was built, was linked to extractive issues. So PIDA is about reversing the trend so that infrastructure is used for development, and the best way to use it for development at the continental level is to boost regional integration. So Pida is reconstructing the infrastructure that was extractive aimed in order to make it inclusive aimed. So these inclusive institutions, by the way, inclusive meaning very concretely how to create jobs through the projects. These inclusive institutions is absolutely fundamental. And lastly, I think, as the Commission also rightly said, our partners, starting with the African Development Bank, and which is our internal African partner, and going to be European Union and the German cooperation, are working with us hand in hand because we have the same goal, how to make this development inclusive, because it will have consequences on the global scene. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause again, an enthusiastic one. Okay, so this is how we will go, and thank you very much to the panelists. They were very open, and I like what the Commissioner said, that they usually say, oh, protocols observed. She seems to have suggested do not observe any protocol, because we are here to try and interact together and get to ask those maybe even uncomfortable questions when we're talking to the panelists. Now, for the journalists and all the others who want to give input, it's not only for the journalists, it's for everybody who is in here. State your name, organization you represent, and whom you're directing your question to. And because of time, can we just try a question per person, and if we have enough time, then we get to round two. We'll have roving mics around that you raise your hand, and let's not take time to warm up, because there isn't any time to warm up. If you have a question, let's go for it immediately. I see a hand there, but whilst someone is still getting there, I have a question, if I may start with you, Dr. Mayaki, and say, it's a sensitive issue at times. We talk about governance. I just want to give you a story that's very practical that happened, which is talk about trans-border, cross-border initiatives. You spoke about regulatory frameworks, harmonization of these issues. We've heard all the recs talking about it for some time now in different forums that I've attended. But some of it, is it not just egos right above? We are going to ask the uncomfortable questions. Is it not just egos right above? Because in these two countries, the example I'm giving you is that it was difficult to get a visa to go to this country. But the moment this big man got off power, this country signed agreements for visas the following day, and it was easy for people to move. Now, so are we struggling with regulatory frameworks, or are we struggling at times at the egos on top? Now, I know you are allowed to be, I'll allow you to be diplomatic if you don't want to talk about the men at the top. But are we really struggling with regulatory issues? Maybe that's the question. Oh, sorry, Dr. Mayaki. Is that mic working?
Okay, good.
Oh.
So, three issues on your question. The first one is we are talking about institutions that have embedded in their behavior a resistance to change. The particularity of leadership within the African context is that when institutional quality is low, you need a leader, and you need leaders who have the capacities to change the institution, even if the resistance is high. So, and it's very simple. You can make a quick correlation between the velocity of a change nationally and the quality of a leadership and all the other indicators. So leadership is absolutely fundamental, because it is the leadership that triggers the change. But what we are observing today is that in complementarity, to this issue, the regional dimension and the very high impact that the regional economic communities are having on change processes at the national level allows this thing to happen. So if you do a map of how these visa issues, for example, are moving speedily from one region to another, you will see that the criteria is not a national one, it's a regional one. There are regions where it is moving faster because the leadership collectively has an understanding of it, and there are regions where it is moving slower. But all in all, within the African Union processes and within the reforms that are taking place, I think we have made huge strides in terms of building the necessary change. Yes. So it's not, Africa's future is not about big men, it's about sound institutions. Yes. And we go back to the governance issue. Huh? And so it's important to think about institutions.
Sure. Commissioner, you want to come in?
I think you oversimplified the issue for harmonization only for visas. Just know that maybe this is the easiest one. Probably is the easiest one. And I mentioned the two initiatives, the free trade area and the single African air transport market, but we also in March launched the free movement of people. Very happy to see now about what, 35, 40 countries have opened the borders for Africans. And the others are, now they made facilities for visas, visa on arrival or online visa and stuff like that. Probably this is the easiest. So that's, I'm not even going to stop there. But it demonstrates the will of the continent for its people to move around, people and goods. Now, where it's difficult and complex, it's not that one. When you talk about a sector like energy, that's the complex one, and it's not about EDUs. It's technically difficult and not easy, because we not only talk about systems, we talk about the tarification systems, about people working together, about teams. And CEO here mentioned the cross-border complexities and difficulties. That's a difficult one. It's not about opening the border and then, oh, with your passport you go. No, it's not that. So there are technical difficulties. And please, I would very much appreciate if we stop talking about Africa like this, that we are all corrupt, that the leaders, no, it's not the case. Look at the African Union, the European Union, how many years it took them to harmonize these policies. It's not easy. It's not easy, and there are difficulties. The beauty is that we are doing it, we're determined to do it, and we are working on it in the different sectors. I can talk about energy, I can talk about roads and transport, digitalization, same thing, but it is happening. And it's happening in many regions. I mean, we talked here about power pools, but it is happening. It's just that also many of these issues are extremely complex, technically complex.
Indeed. Commissioner, you allowed us to really press you on this. If we were asked with show of hand on how many people struggled getting here, talking about this visa issue, it's still a real issue. I'm not saying the issues you're raising are not difficult, but I'm saying for a little man, for a businessman who wants to cross, some things are still getting very difficult. And these are the issues that the media get to hear every day, and they want to talk about it. The other thing also, I'm coming to you, Mr. Danso. The other thing also is, I'm very thankful the CEO has said we have tangible examples. Now, if we have tangible examples like Kazungula, we now have proof of concept. We now know how to do this thing. Why are we still struggling, as the CEO said, with capacity? Why are we still struggling with bankability, which Mr. Danso spoke about? Because we now have sort of a concept, which probably could be a blueprint we can use. Again, I don't want to simplify, as the Commissioner says, because every case is different. But we now have proof of concepts. And we're still talking about we are not reaching bankability. And yes, people like him will be scared in investing their pension funds. But that's the thing. I have a guy I flew with yesterday who told me he has been on the road for forever to get here. and going outside Africa to come back to Africa. It still happens. So we're not knocking Africa, Commissioner, to answer your question directly, but we're saying, you know, when you're on group 1 in class, and if the guy on group D, if he passes 2, the teacher will say clap hands for him. But if you're on group 1, you fail 1, the teacher will give you a hard time. So we say you're doing good things as Africa, but can we move faster? Mr. Danso, how come to you?
Thank you. You know, you raised some good points, but I'm not sure if it's the accurate lens.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you're looking forward or if you're looking backwards, and I'm not sure if you're identifying that you can get an A star for some of the progress that we've actually made. Now, we're talking about mobilizing trillions of dollars of capital, and that in itself is a very significant and real accomplishment. But that accomplishment is on the back of identifying that there are some catalytic changes that have already been put in place, which is the framework. So when we talk about bankability, that comes through a historical context. The historical context that I'm talking about and that my constituency look at is the fact that infrastructure has predominantly been a public sector to development finance institution domain up until very recently. And I think what we are very pleased to have in terms of our partnership with NEPAD is a realization that the institutional investment community, the pension funds that are national pension funds, quasi-government institutions in many respects, have the capacity to be able to assist governments and the local private sector develop the projects. And I think there's this nexus that hasn't really been properly understood or exploited, which is the fact that the Commissioner mentioned, let's try to engage the African private sector. Now, a lot of the African private sector sit on the portfolios of national pension funds. And there's been a bit of a disconnect between the terminology of bankability and investability. You know, one is looking more at the debt side, the other is looking more at the long-term equity side and managing the actual execution risks and the performance of the actual investment. But right now, we actually have in this Pida program and the $138 billion for the next 10 years, a huge investment opportunity. So I think the missing link to date has really been how do we actually engage long-term capital in working with the public sector to develop the criteria, because there's been a little bit of a standoff, which is the governments have developed a project and then the institutional investment community would say, well, it doesn't meet our criteria. This is principally designed for a development finance institution, and we sit back. What Dr. Mayaki and the African Union Commission have been able to do is say, encourage us to come forward and say, no one understands our investment criteria better than us. Let's partner. Let's bring the local private sector as the founding project developers and the developer teams on board. And then let's see how we can form co-investment partnerships with our international peers that have long-term capital, as well as some of their private sector that also have institutional expertise. This is a new approach and a new model that has been catalyzed that in many respects can transform the job creation opportunities, the infrastructure efficiency that we've been looking at for a very long time. So I think that is really the story. Because if you look at infrastructure as an investable asset class globally, we heard about the US, we heard about Europe. A number of those markets still have the same challenges, if not worse challenges, in terms of engaging their own institutional investors into infrastructure. And everyone's calling for it now, and it's now actually beginning to happen on the continent. So I think that really is the story. Institutional investors working with development finance institutions with efficient political capital, because that's what attracted us to NEPAD and the African Union. It's the ability and looking at case examples similar to the N4 in South Africa, where it was a cross-border project, and once you had the participation of a head of state that could engage another head of state, and it was ably intermediated. President Mbeki at the time, President Chizano, I think President Mandela was engaged. That's the leadership that I think in some cases we take for granted in the likes of an African Union and a NEPAD. And I think understanding that dynamic, we would all do well. Looking back, without that model in place, I'm not sure if we were going to be accelerating progress psychologically or practically. Sure. Thank you.
The CEO, Dr. Mayaka, I want to press you, Mr. Danso. The CEO says money is not our issue. The money is there. and he then outlined what he sees as the stumbling blocks. Do you answer to that? Do you see that being achievable?
I think if you can align interests, anything is achievable. And I think specifically, as I mentioned, we have a 5% agenda. And the 5% agenda is designed with and in partnership with the African institutional investment community. So what does that say? What we're saying as the institutional investment community is, if we can establish a framework that enables us to execute against our fiduciary responsibilities and our own internal investment criteria, we can certainly deploy a lot of
I suppose
capital.
what I'm asking is there a meeting of minds? Because you say we recognize what the AU and NEPAD has said. It's really true, so that we get this out, right? We recognize the framework they've put, and you've again honored them and said, they say we know our terrain better, so understand us when we say this is the way we should go. Are you understanding them, and can you work with them?
We are working with them on the one hand, and I think our interests need to continually align. If you look at the PPP frameworks, it's taken decades and tens and hundreds of millions of dollars to educate all key constituent members in that ecosystem, from the ministries of finance to the line ministries to the private sector to the development finance institutions to the actual civil and consulting engineering companies and the contractors. So the basis is there. The heads of state have actually endorsed the program.
Basis is there, what's lacking?
Nothing is lacking. I mean, I think
Oh,
that the working relationship is what is evolving now, which is why we are here to engage with key stakeholders around specific opportunities to better understand and align each other's
We're
interests.
still better understanding each other thus far, or are we understanding each other already? I'm sorry. I see you all. I'm sorry. Okay, let's go to the CEO and then we go to the floor.
I'll just finish with you on that particular point. I think one thing we need to really understand is this is a sophisticated asset class. As one person once said, it's not making 5-minute rice. So, you know, there are a number of different moving pieces and levels of sophistication, both at the macro and the micro level. And I think that is the level of clarity that in any single transaction you work through and you align interests. And I think that's exactly where we are. We are committed to aligning our interests for a common goal.
Okay. I'll allow the CEO, then I'll come to the floor. I apologize. I'll come to the floor. I'm sorry.
With the permission of Hubert and in direction of the media, I'll try to simplify his sophisticated language. So you see, the first model was we were chasing money with badly prepared projects. That's for the media. We were chasing money with badly prepared projects, so we couldn't get these projects badly prepared financed. So the second model is that we did our homework in order to create the foundations that could lead projects to financial close. So in order to do that, first of all, you needed a pipeline of projects. Secondly, you needed project preparation capacity. Thirdly, you needed to look at the soft issues and the issues of investability. Fourthly, you needed to look at the governance issues in transboundary projects, how they could be manageable. And fourthly, you needed to attract, through strong communication strategy, institutional investors and make the projects attractive. And among them, when he's referring to the 5% agenda, just a simple example. The African, and that's for the media too, the African wealth funds and sovereign wealth funds and pension funds have assets under management which are over $1 trillion. Where do they invest? In an American highway, an Australian rail, or a UK rail. Because they think by investing in these domains, they have a more secure return. So that's the narrative that we are changing within Model 2. So the change of paradigm is, first of all, we need to do our homework, show that we are doing our homework, and then engage with institutional investors on very concrete issues. And then you create trust. At the end of the day, the question is a question of trust. So we are moving from a situation where we're chasing money to a situation where we are building trust. That's the issue.
Yes. Thank you.
And then there's your role, Daniel, the role of the media. Because in this trust building, in building the image of the continent, that's you. So it's not only the AU and the NEPAD and the people sitting here.
Sure.
We continue to project our continent as the risky continent. The projects are, this is not true, because the rate of return on this continent is higher than anywhere else probably. We need for people to understand that we are having good governance. You know, it's more the rule than the exception on this continent. So we also, all of us, especially you, media, have a role. Because at the end of the day, the investor, the slightest thing will scare the investors away. You want to make sure that they get the real picture of what's happening on the continent, what efforts we are deploying, that we are improving, we are serious in what we do.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayaki. Question, sir, your name and whom you're directing the question to.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Moderator, you seem to have asked most of the questions. So I'll try to...
I apologize.
No apologies. The questions will be directed to African Development Bank, the Development Bank of Southern Africa,
yes,
and indeed maybe the Commissioner. So here we go. There's a huge infrastructure deficit we have had. My name is James Manda. I'm from the African Forum for Utility Regulators. There's a huge infrastructure deficit, and we have just heard that it requires 130 billion per year to close the gap. And there's also a challenge of bankability. Now, I'll repeat the question that he just asked. What are the specific measures that different institutions represented in front doing in order to help developers to get rid of the challenge of bankability of projects? Because we have heard this story for a long time, that there's money out there, but that the projects are not bankable. So what is the problem? And how are you helping developers to cross that bridge?
Okay.
Then the second one.
No, but first, we don't have time, so I'll allow
this
you one.
This is very important, sir.
I know. Every question here is important.
Because you asked this question, so I just wanted them to reiterate. But my question is...
Sir, can you allow me? Let's them answer, and then we'll go to someone else, please. Well, then if we have another question, we'll come back to you. So we'll go for 3 people. There's a hand behind, and then there's a hand here. So once we have the 3 questions, we come to the podium. We really actually are on borrowed time, so I'm trying to manage. Yes,
thank you very much. My name is Omar Reddy. I represent the two media organizations, Spanish News Agency, Agencia FA, and Africa Media and Communications, which is based in Addis Ababa. So my question is, the African, it can be addressed by Dr. Mayaki and Madam Commissioner. Okay. The African Union is embarking on huge reform program. Those issues you have raised, financing, governance, project management issues, have been touched by this reform. Now that the reform partly has been adopted at the extraordinary summit just a week ago or so, and there is going to be implementation of those reform proposals. How do you anticipate the problems you have mentioned, the lack of governance, bankable projects, and the related issues? How do you anticipate these to change when the reform proposals are implemented? How would you think the reform program affect these programs?
Thank you. Ma'am. Could we have a roving mic here in front, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, panelists. My question will be going to Dr. Miak.
Your name, ma'am?
My name is Nonkululeko Sindane. I represent the Construction Industry Development Board of South Africa. My question is more on timing. Recognizing all the issues that you had already indicated in terms of capacity to develop projects and all of that. What we tend to see is that the lag is too long, and somehow people lose the interest along the way when the resources could be mobilized to do the work. How do we try and either shorten the period or introduce new interventions that still give us good governance, good everything, but within a limited period so that we can see the development in our lifetime, same as the Kazangula bridge? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go to the podium. I think most of the questions, excuse me, were directed to the Commissioner and Dr. Mayaki. So I'll start with you, Commissioner, if that's okay.
I think, yeah, I won't stand long. I think there's a confusion here, if you'd allow me. First of all, we did not say that there is no bankability, no root governance. On the contrary, we said the opposite. We said the very early version of the program had these deficiencies. Now we are improving. So that's what we said. But specifically on the question regarding reforms, happy to say that the reforms, the institutional reforms of the African Union Commission have been approved, yes, in the summit that was held on the 17th and 18th of this month. They pertain to the actual functioning of the African Union. This is not about the projects of the Pida. So please make the difference between the two. But in general, I mean, the reforms will have an impact on everything that we do, because it will make the Commission much more agile, efficient, self-reliant, which is important because its functioning will be relying on the actual finance from African countries as opposed to a finance coming from abroad. But I'm happy to say that we already started implementing these reforms, and as I speak, in the year 2018, the African Union Commission already cut its reliance on external or non-African funding by half. So 50% of the previous funding that used to come from non-African countries is no longer needed at the African Union as we speak, and as we go forward, we will be completely reliant only on African finance, so to emphasize the identity and the ownership of the African Union Commission by Africans.
Thank you. You had a question.
All right. Thank you. There was a question on specific measures of what ADB, development partners, are doing. And on the ADB front, I think I can give 3 examples. First, we have a project preparation facility that has been in place for the past, since 2006, and has really prepared most of the projects that are under Pida. I talked about the North-South corridor, projects along the North-South corridor, projects like the Lagos-Abidjan corridor as examples that we have provided support to. The second element that the bank has done has been to establish what we call the Africa 50, which is a separate institution made up primarily of African member countries. And what Africa 50 does, it finances projects on the continent more recently, and also developing and structuring projects. More recently at the Africa Investment Forum, that was held 2 weeks ago in South Africa, the Africa 50 announced the launch of the Congo Bridge, and this has really been a regional project that has taken many years to come to fruition. But through an institution like Africa 50, the Congo Bridge will happen. Third is really to look at the instruments that the bank has at its disposal. I spoke about that every 3 years we allocate about $1 billion to regional projects, and specifically most of these projects are Pida projects. And to actually say that within that framework, we do also dedicate about 10% of funding on each of the project to support what Dr. Mayaki had actually alluded to, the coordination issues, and also what we call the issues of harmonization of policies and regulations across countries. So really these are very, very specific, and we take these seriously. And to give an example, the Kazungula Bridge, which you'll be visiting later this week, we've already done an assessment of what needs to be done in terms of harmonization of rules and regulations, and now trying to put together the coordination mechanisms and what needs to be done to ensure that once the bridge is complete, we now have smooth movement of goods and services across the bridge. Let me also emphasize, when people talk about political will, the Kasungula Bridge is really a good example of a country, Botswana, that really took out a loan to support traffic for its northern neighbors. If Botswana had decided not to take out that loan, it really, yes, it needs the bridge, but not as much as the northern countries, because most of the traffic, if you look at Kazungula going through, is coming from South Africa, going through to DR Congo, going to Zambia, and to other countries north. So really, this is really a very good example of regional integration, where a country took out a loan to support the process. And finally, on a specific example, is we are in the process, and we've given SADC about $2 million US to develop a project that will help it attract institutional investors, like my colleague has been saying, some of these risks, how do we institutionalize this process to enable that regional projects within SADC actually invested in by private sector? How do we crowd in institutional investors, and how do we put in the right instruments? So these are some of the work that we're doing, and I'll be happy to provide specifics afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mayaki, you wanted to say something, sir?
No, to my friend of Afur,
yes.
I was going to go back to Kennedy's expression, don't ask what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. So I was going to ask Afur, please ask yourself what you can do to help Pida's being implemented. Yeah, that's mine. And we can have a discussion afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I know there were one or two questions. From what I hear from the director from AFDB, they are happy to interact offline, as it were. So you can do that in different times. But otherwise, a round of applause for our panelists. And yes, Commissioner, we will try and have an agenda for the continent as the fourth estate. But you have to empower us with weapons that we can sell. At times also, we might not have the weapons to sell. Okay, thank you, everybody. We are headed for closed sessions. Another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Another round of applause.